clouds began to roll. Then I saw the devil's tail over the town of Waco. I could see it coming down as darkness filled the sky. It hit the ground with a mighty sound, and the earth began to fly. It was a tornado. Tornado, 1953 in my memory in Waco. The legend said it could never happen because of an Indian spirit. They said this land could never be touched by the wind called the devil's tail. But turning back the pages of history, how many can remember the sight? Oh, the buildings of the town came crumbling down like they were blasted by dynamite. By the tornado. Tornado, 1953 in my memory in Waco.
I went up to my bedroom, which was on the second story on the southeast corner of the house, sometime in the vicinity of 4 o'clock, and looking out over the city, the sky was very, very dark, purple dark rather than black. But there were no indications of a severe storm, yet this was during the time that the tornado was going on.
It was a terribly dark, rainy day. It was on a Monday, and it rained the whole day long.
But Mr. Blaylock and I walked out there, and he put his hand out, and the big drop of rain hit his hand, and he said, "Junior," he said, and I am Wilton Lanning Jr., he said, "Put your hand out there, tell me what you feel." I said, the water was warm, and he said, shook his head, and he said, "That's what they say happens when there's going to be a tornado."
The weather was cloud, overcast, very dark, very muggy, very hot, very still. Very little air blowing anywhere. It's just in the dark cloud. There were storm clouds, and the lights began to flicker. And of course, a lot of the older people in the place, I'm sure, knew what was about to happen. The lights went out, and he and I kept on playing between the flashes of lightning.
It began to get so dark, it was like night almost, and then we had terrible hail. And I called my husband and asked him what it was doing downtown. Not anything. And it was raining, and the hail was such huge pieces that I even went out just long enough to grab a piece or two and put in the refrigerator to show him, because I thought I'd never make him believe the size of this hail. And in a little bit the phone rang, and he said, "Honey, town has just blown away."
The time was May 11th, 1953, 4:30 on a Monday afternoon. The city of Waco was about to undergo the worst disaster of its history. But no one expected a tornado because of an old Indian legend.
I'd always heard all my life that nature wouldn't allow a tornado to happen in Waco, and that's the reason that they had the Waco Indians settled here, because of the contour of the area, that they never had a tornado, and that wasn't a problem for Waco.
The weather had been threatening throughout the day. A tornado watch had been issued by the Weather Bureau, but about 4 o'clock, radio listeners learned that the danger had passed. They were not aware that a tornado had already hit San Angelo at 2:15 that afternoon, taking 11 lives and injuring 66 others. Damage was placed at more than $3 million. Many people on that May 11th were just reading the morning newspaper that carried such headlines as, "The long drought continues." The weather forecast read, partly cloudy and mild. A newspaper ad told the story of a pre-inventory clearance sale with prices slashed as much as one-half at the R.T. Dennis and Company. At the Joy Theater, 422 Austin Avenue, you could have seen the movie The Lusty Men with Robert Mitchum and Susan Hayward. Meanwhile, the rain continued, the sky darkened. Just a few miles to the southeast, at 4:20 p.m., a tornado struck Lorena and Hewitt, doing minor damage. In downtown Waco, it was so dark, no one knew death was approaching. The funnel was now passing over Baylor Stadium, heading toward the Bells Hill residential area. Tragedy was imminent.
First time I think that we really realized something was wrong was as we got in the area of the courthouse, and we could see that people were running around, and first thing we noticed that power lines were down. There was a lot of activity. We still couldn't see any of the buildings that had been destroyed because it was too dark and too overcast.
I went to the front door at about 10 minutes to 5 or thereabouts to lock the door, because some people were straggling in all wet and excited and upset. And one fellow, I locked the door, and one fellow there in the rain was beating on the door frantically, and I said, "We're closed," and he said, "I know," but I let him in. And he said, "The whole town is blowing apart."
It was the height of the afternoon rush hour, with most shoppers and employees still in the business district. The town's major intersection at that time, 5th and Austin, was taking the full force of the storm.
Looking through the front window, I noticed that the storm was coming in, and suddenly, within what seemed to me just a few seconds, but I'm sure it was a few minutes, everything turned extremely dark. I was unable to see across the street. Then suddenly it became light, and looking again across the street, I saw that all the buildings had been blown down or destroyed. As I went to the first floor, pandemonium, of course, had taken charge. People were screaming, running. The officers of the First National Bank, one especially Mr. Earl Harrison, asked me to come to the bank, as they had all gone to the back of the bank into the vault, and some of them were extremely frightened, some of them were in shock. I told them at the present time I couldn't, that I had to try to get to the hospital as quick as I could, as I knew that there had been many casualties.
I well recall exactly what happened because most of the signs along the buildings were blown down at that time. It was raining heavily, it was real dark. The large signs blew off the buildings. One of them hit the station wagon. But the strangest thing the back end of the station wagon blew out. The door came open.
Heavy rain began to fall, and it got real dark. And that looked like a gust of black cloud. A lady looked out of her window, and she saw a big black cloud look like a train. I was so scared. You could not see across the street. It was so dark. And every tree, little tree, big tree, and every tree you see was waving and bending and touching the ground. And the children were crying, and I was trying to pacify them.
And as I said, we were in the path, but it jumped over our building. It blew out all the plate glass windows, and that was the only damage we sustained. And we had no idea at that time of the tremendous damage around us, because we couldn't see it at all.
And I remember running out the front door onto a huge porch that we had. And about that time, the house kind of lifted and then bumped down again, and maybe it moved over like 5 feet. It was picked up and set down about 5 feet.
Off its foundation.
Off its foundation. We all fell on the porch. My sister, who was pregnant at the time, was just stepping down off the steps, and of course it threw her off the porch. But she was okay. The stove had pulled loose and had flown through, or gone through one of the bedroom walls.
We had a huge oak tree beside the house, beside the back porch with a swing on it, and it had been uprooted, and the roots and part of the trunk were in the kitchen and part on the back porch.
We had just come back from a cup of coffee and were getting the office in order when the tornado struck. The nurse in the office was in the operating room of the office, and when the building caved in on us, we were buried for 3.5 hours. The nurse in the office was killed. Dr. Ernest Johnson received a severe laceration of his left hand, and I received a puncture wound of my lungs. And the only thing that we could hear after the tornado was over was voices. We couldn't tell where the voices were, but we could hear voices. And then, of course, we heard the nurse in the office die. She didn't die immediately. And we even talked to her while she died.
Several people were in the Torrance Recreation Center playing pool as the funnel swooped down. One of those was Donald Hansard, a 17-year-old La Vega high school student.
It started raining real hard, and the wind was blowing, and the lights went out. And we thought it was just a rainstorm, and we didn't worry about it. We went on playing, just fooling around. And I remember we shot at some balls in the dark for the heck of it, and we noticed a fellow down beside a table, and I looked up, and all of a sudden, the roof fell in, and something knocked me down, and then the rest of it fell, and it knocked us down, and I guess I was unconscious for a little while. When I woke up, well, all that was on top of us. Kay, I don't think it must have got him instantly, because I never could get him to arouse. And as soon as it fell in, of course, everybody was hollering for help, screaming, and of course we were always praying everything we had, and some out loud, and it will seem like a long time before somebody got there to help us. It had my leg pinned down. I tried to pull loose so I could crawl around, but I couldn't get loose.
This building that we spoke about, where this boy Donald Hansard was rescued, and he's now on his way to the hospital, is completely demolished all the way from the center of the block between 4th and 5th, which would be facing Franklin. That entire area is down. Now they're cutting through with axes, and you might say, someone remarked in the audience a moment ago there that we had, that this Hansard boy was certainly a lucky youngster, inasmuch as he was just stumbled on, you might say. They were digging through and happened to hear him, and he talked to them, gave them full instructions as he was being brought out. It was a tunnel-like affair, and he had to be pulled out, and he would catch on to the blanket that was sent down into him, and they pulled him out in that manner. He was very rational and seemed to more or less direct the operation.
Others watched horrified from their automobiles as buildings crumbled around them.
The weather was getting dark, and 2 or 3 little ice cubes fell around, and all of a sudden the tornado hit. And I just put her down on the floor and laid on top of her. In the car, and put my foot on the brake. And I was afraid that a garbage can was going to hit my windshield. Things were really flying. And the wind started from one direction. It kind of came from the back. And then I looked up, and it was blowing from the front. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, it just hit. And I just knew I was in a tornado.
The twister had devastated the downtown business district in only a matter of seconds. Huge buildings became masses of splintered wood and bricks. Automobiles were crushed under tons of debris. Every building in the business section, east from 9th Street toward the river on Austin, Franklin, and Washington, was damaged to some extent. Waco had been stunned. The dead and injured were crumpled under layers of debris. Those who were alive could do nothing but wait and pray for help.
After the cloud had gone away and the wind had disappeared, the town began to come alive and realize its greatest fear. Many people had lost their lives. Buildings and homes lay on the ground. Now was the time to pull together and save the lives that could be found.
Less than an hour after the tragedy, Bob Martin of radio station KWTX was on the scene, trying to describe what was called horror beyond description.
We go now down the street toward the most intense part of the wind at the R.T. Dennis Company and Joy Theater. And as we walk down the street, we see the signs of downtown Waco all leaning at strange degrees, some of them 30 or 40 degrees, and some of them entirely down and on the sidewalk. And we've always wondered what a tornado could bring about, and we look now to the terrific destruction of this giant wind as it hit 5th and Austin, the direct center of the downtown business section of Waco. And here is a great mass of rubble and debris. The R.T. Dennis Company is completely demolished. And we mean that it is completely demolished. The rubble is not over 1.5 stories high. And you can imagine what a terrific amount of destruction this wind has rendered. Or half a block down the street of Austin Avenue, from 5th and Austin Avenue, or a half a block down the street, there is no building standing. It is a complete mass of destruction. The automobiles parked in front of the building are destroyed, but more than that is the possibility of the many dead and injured who are within the building. The clocks of downtown Waco stopped at a quarter until 5.
If anybody got any trucks, they ought to come down to it.
The clock stopped at a quarter till 5, and that meant that a great many people were still in the buildings. Here in the Joy Theater and the Chris's Cafe, Hollywood Tailors, Harlick's Man Shop, all of these are completely destroyed. There is no building standing. We don't know how many people were in the theater at the time of the wind. We don't know how many people were in R.T. Dennis and Company at the time. But it is a great mass of rubble, of brick and mortar, lumber, of twisted signs, demolished automobiles, and at the same time we have a great amount of the human excitement and intensity, the human pathos that goes along with such a disaster as this. Surely the greatest disaster that Waco, Texas has ever known. Still sounds going out for lights. Surely there could be no greater destruction than what we have here. We are walking on a brick wall that is surely 8 or 10 feet high. Bricks 8 or 10 feet thick, and what is under that we do not know. We can only imagine. What terrific tragedy took place here we cannot say. We can only walk back through the rubble and the destruction as the rescue workers rapidly dig away the bricks, trying to reach those who are still alive, trying to reach those who are screaming for help. It will be days before this destruction will ever be cleared, before the toll can ever be determined.
Come on, all that stuff out of there. Yeah, you can hear the wind.
We're looking down now at a worker who is apparently approaching one of the injured persons. This rescue work has been going on for 20 or 30 minutes. Sir, can you tell us if there are any alive there?
Yeah, we hear them from right up here. We hear some under them things, and we're trying to get all them bricks out of here and women on under here, but we're trying to do our best to get as soon as possible.
What is your name, sir?
Frank Source.
Frank Source. And, sir, have you carried any dead or injured from the building yet?
No, but they say there's about 15 or 18 right under this building, the Chris's Cafe building.
15 or 18 under the building now that the men are trying to reach. Sir, have you, you can hear the bricks as they're being tossed from the building as the people gather around in groups at different points beneath this collapsed structure and try to find those who are yet alive and breathing. What a terrific task. Something which only happens in a lifetime, the first tornado in the history of Waco, Texas. And it had to enter the very heart of the city at a time when the people were thronging within the building.
Radio newsman Bob Walker was also on the scene of the R.T. Dennis Furniture Building shortly after the tornado struck.
We found out that several of the workers have been inside under this particular portion of R.T. Dennis. They have talked to two ladies who are trapped underneath. They say they are comfortable but can't move and seem to be rational. Tell us that also two men are nearby who have made signs by tapping that they're still alive.
Bob,
yes.
Do you have the names of those two?
I do not have. Unfortunately, we're unable to get those names. Water has been carried to the young ladies, and they are more or less digging, and you might say that there's possibly 100 people, 100 men, including civilians and Army personnel, digging frantically at the debris while the crane is holding up this particular section. They think they'll get to them shortly now. This is an estimate, and please understand that it is an estimate. We do not know exactly, and it's difficult to get names, but it is said that something like possibly 35 or 40 people worked in this building of 5 floors. As we say, we do not know where all of them were in there, and we do not know that that is absolutely accurate, but it is assumed that that many people worked. Possibly 6 or 7 have been brought out.
One passing note before we go, and that is an unusual report we got from a person who was high up in the Amicable building at the time. That person said that the building actually swayed when the terrific wind came through, that the people in the upper floors could hardly keep their footing. So you can see what a terrific wind passed through the downtown district of Waco this afternoon.
One of the people trapped, probably the longest, 14 hours, who lived to tell of her incredible ordeal, was an employee of the Dennis Company, Lily Matkin.
And I found that I was trapped, though I couldn't move, only my right arm, and I was so crumpled up that I don't suppose I was more than 2 feet long. Then I started screaming for help, help. And when I couldn't make anyone hear me, I could hear them talking, but they couldn't hear me, and then I'd start praying. And then I'd just be perfectly calm, and I was getting enough air from the wind on the outside. And then finally I could hear them so close by, and I knew they were, in fact they said they were looking for someone else now. Well, then I just started screaming, and of course, for help, help. My voice was clear and not husky like it is now. And finally he said, I hear someone, and I believe they're right along here. He said, are you a man or a woman? And I said, I'm a woman. And he said, well, where are you? I said, I was in the PBX office. And so then he said, well, can you holler some more? And I said, oh, yes. And I just started screaming again. Well, then someone, an Air Corps woman, said, here she is. No, he turned on his flashlight. He said, can you see this light? And I said, yes. And I put my hand out, and he said, oh, I can see her hand moving. And I had already felt and moved and turned enough to know that I didn't have any broken bones. But the weight had fallen between my arm and my hip, and I was almost face down on the left side. And then they started, and I said, what time is it? They said about 9 o'clock. And I said, well, I want some air. When they started working, they cut all my air off. Such a crowd, you know. And then, from then on, the 2 air corpsmen kept me with oxygen till they took me out to put me in the ambulance.
And as news of the tragedy spread, rescue volunteers continued to respond, but so did the curious. Mayor Ralph Wolf pleaded with the public to stay away.
We would like to ask that the citizens of Waco cooperate in every way by not coming to this area either afoot or in a vehicle. No vehicles will be permitted in this area at all, and no sightseers. Only owners of buildings or managers of business establishments will be permitted to enter their business houses or to enter this devastated area.
The mayor and other city officials set up headquarters first in City Hall and later moved to the First National Bank in the Amicable Insurance Building, which was miraculously spared by the storm, as was the nearby Roosevelt Hotel. Volunteering their assistance were men from Conley Air Force Base and the National Guard. The telephone company rushed a mobile radio telephone truck to the heart of the area. Services of the Salvation Army and the Red Cross began to function at once. Blood donor volunteers stood patiently in pouring rain. Over 3,000 families were given groceries and clothing. Looting was difficult to control in the rain and darkness, but never became a major problem. Tuesday, May 12, 1953, dawned on a city still struggling to even get to its knees. As the rescue work continued below, the general manager of KWTX, M.N. Buddy Bostic, surveyed the devastation from the air.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Buddy Bostic in the KWTX airplane, 1,000 feet above the ground, flying over the devastated area in an attempt to describe for you the path that this tornado took as it whirled through Waco. And this is the finest way that I know of that this path can be described for you. And it is very visible from a plane at 1,000 feet. You can just see the wreckage that has been wrought. And some areas that have been completely spared, while other areas have been completely destroyed. And now we're heading towards the downtown section of Waco. And this is the area that we've been interested in flying over. To see if we can see from the air the havoc that has been wrought. And of course, down below it is very visible. As we have described to you in the many times that we've been on the air, how all of these buildings here, from about 5th and Austin on south to the river, have been torn up. We're flying now over Katy Park, and that's a point that hadn't been described before. That area, all of the bleachers there are completely torn down. The wall is completely torn down. The buildings just to the west of Katy Park is destroyed. And that mill just to the east of Katy Park, the water tanks and oil tanks seem to be standing, but some of the tops of some of the buildings there the tops have been blown off. Although now let's take a look at the square. And as we bank our plane very steeply, we can see the square in Clifton Simpson Hardware and all the buildings around it, particularly those buildings to the west of the square, and they have been completely demolished. We're flying now over the Kiwanis Field. And, oh yes, we remember this is the area where 2 boys lost their lives as they were trapped in this huge concrete building next to the swimming pool.
The injured were still being rescued and rushed to the hospital. Gene Moore of A&A Ambulance Company was there.
Just a few minutes ago, I noticed the boys working over on the Chris Cafe job. We removed some 3 or 4 out of there, many of which were, of course, dead. At the present time, to my recollection, it seems that my ambulances have carried into both the hospitals some 75 or 80 injured and possibly some 20 dead. This certainly is no criterion as to the number of casualties we will have before this thing is over.
And in spite of the large number of people receiving treatment for injuries, the Medical Society voted not to charge for their services. Several days passed before a semblance of normality returned to the city. The statistics were grim, and they only told the factual side of the drama. The final death list contained 114 names, 145 others listed as having major injuries, 952 with less serious ones.
My son, Billy Watkins, worked for the RT Dennis Company, and he called his wife Betty, who taught at La Vega High School, not to come to town because a tornado was expected. Before he hung up, she could hear the glass breaking. Billy's body was not found for 4 days, and the unbelievable anguish of not knowing, and then the knowledge that he was dead was heartbreaking. The tornado changed my life, and even now, 28 years later, the pain of losing my only son is ever with me.
More than 2,000 families suffered loss of some description. Estimates place the number of homes destroyed at 150, with 250 others heavily damaged. More than 2,000 vehicles were damaged, many demolished. The total damage estimate was $51 million. But from old dreams buried in the rubble, new dreams began to emerge.
Destruction's path was oh so great. Many thought it was the end of the town. But the people were strong, and today Waco lives on. They built up what had been blown down.
Many years have come and gone since 1953. But there are lessons to be learned, even in a memory. It takes a lot of love and courage and a strong will to survive. That's what the people of Waco had to keep their city alive. After the tornado,
some say the tornado was the death of the downtown area as a retail center. The square around City Hall never survived. But Mayor Wolf said Waco would rise again and be stronger. He was right. Today, Waco is a growing and active city with diversified industry. There is little evidence of physical damage left by the tornado, but the scars left on the memories of survivors and loved ones of the victims are still healing. Many people today will not remain in the downtown area when a dark cloud appears. Much could be said of the courage and faith of those caught on the path of destruction, and also of those who gave so unselfishly in a time of desperate need. Perhaps radio announcer Bob Martin summarized it best almost 3 decades ago as he stood in the midst of the destruction and watched the sun break through the clouds momentarily at dawn Tuesday morning.
We have had our faith in man bolstered again, as we do all the time. We have seen what a person is able to accomplish when he's called upon to do so. And there have been miracles performed. There have been unwritten acts of heroism performed that we will never know about. But those that we did encounter, we will always remember.
Tornado, tornado, 1953 in my memory, it made Waco. Tornado, listen what the people say about that day in May. But the tornado, 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 tornado,